how's it going? How are things? Toofty here, and I've got a question for you. Do you think matchmaking could be better? Yeah, me too, of course you do. And I think that as a technology, matchmaking and ranking is kind of in its infancy. So what I wanted to do today is chat to you guys about some ideas around how matchmaking could be better. A conversation that I'm sure loads of the big game companies are continuing to have behind the scenes. So yeah, the ideas I wanted to share with you guys are not like, I bet no one's thought of this. It's just, I imagine these are some of the things that are being thrown around behind the scenes, and some of them may be just impossible to do. Some of them maybe they're already doing, and some of them maybe we're really close to doing. So we're going to focus our discussion on Overwatch. As we all know, the way it works at the moment is largely based on wins versus losses, and it's based on the experience of your entire team versus the experience of the entire enemy team, and they also sometimes use your performance in relation to other people's performance using the same class at your level. These are some of the things we know, but I'm sure there's much more to it than that. Now the win and loss thing, you can't really change that. You know, it makes sense. So I'm not really going to be talking about that. I'm going to be talking more about the second part, which is performance-based analysis. This is where I think there's loads of interesting things that can be done and maybe being done behind the scenes, and hopefully will be done in the future. The problem with largely basing your rank on your wins and losses is that it requires an awful lot of games to be played before you reach where you're meant to be. If you play 3 games, that practically says nothing. You could be really unlucky, you could be really lucky. It doesn't really do anything. As soon as you play like 10, 20, 30 games, that's when it can figure out, okay, there's some patterns here. You're winning, say, 55% of games. I guess that's my main issue with that system, is because I personally don't get to play every single day. On a good week, say I play 5 competitive games, you know, that's kind of borderline. That's not really enough to get a good idea of your trajectory. Obviously, as that adds up over the season, I played perhaps 20 games, and still it's not really enough to quickly get to the point where you should be. So that's kind of my main issue with the first part of the system, which is just basing it on wins and losses. And I think we should put way more emphasis on the second part of the system, which is performance. So yeah, let's go through some of these ideas. I think they're going to be really interesting to chat about. And let me know what you think. Are these already being used? Do you think it's impossible to use these? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So, number 1, could we detect grouping? Now obviously we've got to be careful here, it's not for every single class. You don't want to make sure a Genji or a Tracer is always near the Reinhardt, for example. But some classes should be grouped together. Some of the tanks, Reinhardt, their positions should be fairly predictable. So could there be a way of detecting their position on the map at certain times throughout the game? How close they are to their teammates, if they're using the high ground, for example, as a soldier? Simple things like that. Even the most simplest of things like trickling in. I imagine it would be really easy to detect if one of your players is spawning and going straight to the front lines and the rest of your team is grouped up by spawn, for example. Also, when there's a big team push, I imagine we could detect if there's a big engagement, and then it could look at all the players and say, okay, so this one person for some reason wasn't engaging at that time. They had full health, they were over in this alleyway, and therefore, you know, we're going to punish them for it, or vice versa. A game I played just yesterday, we were a 4 stack, but we had this one Reinhardt who for some reason kind of just sort of held really far forward right at the choke. We were on the second point of Volskaya Industries. Imagine the Rhine being right at the front of that kind of big square area, his shield getting demolished by spam, and the rest of us kind of holding at the back. Something simple like that I would imagine would be easy to figure out. And you know, having that contribute to your reward at the end of the game could be, you know, really interesting, I think. A lot of these ideas I'm going to talk about would work really well sort of together. So another one is survivability. Obviously, survivability on its own isn't very useful, because if you're just standing in a corner and surviving the entire game and you don't die, not very useful. But if you're sticking with the group, pushing at the right times, when your team members go down, you sort of retreat, you fall back, regroup. And if you're able to show that you're kind of surviving, as well as contributing a decent amount to the team fights and not trickling in, those ideas alongside each other could be really interesting. I don't know. Anyway, so the second idea I wanted to chat about was kind of rewarding more flexible players. Now this is probably going to trigger some faces pretty hard. You could argue that right now the system almost encourages you to play one class, master that class, because your basic performance will be good and you'll contribute the most to the team at a very simple level in terms of, like, you know, gold medals if you played that one class over and over. But say for example you're not a great Rhine, but for some reason we really need a Rhine in this map. Maybe you're better value for the team if you switch, but when you do that, unless you actually win in the end, you're not going to get any recognition. In fact, quite the opposite. You'll be, you know, it'll think you played quite poorly because Rhine isn't, you know, a class you're good at. So yeah, I certainly think there's something to this. The idea of seeing that players are able to respond to the enemy's team composition and switch accordingly. respond to what map they're playing on, respond to your own team, what classes they pick and what they lock in early, you know, and filling blatant gaps. Say there's no healers, for example. Maybe you're terrible at healer, but you know you need a healer. Being able to detect that that player has filled that important gap and it's not the class they want to play, you know, that should be fairly simple to do as well, I imagine. And the nice thing about this is it kind of encourages you to be more flexible and to try different classes, which is always good. So my next idea was kind of detecting damage, but not just pointless damage, damage that leads to actual kills. So for example, say there's one guy that does 10k damage, and there's a second guy who does 5k damage, but every single time he does damage, someone follows up and finishes off that player. I imagine that would be fairly simple to calculate, you know, behind the scenes. And the idea here is that basically you're detecting effective damage done, you know, not just spamming a Rhine shield, not just chip damage from a distance, damage when it matters, and damage that leads to a kill. I think that's one of the more simple ones to actually implement in a way. And don't get me wrong, I imagine a lot of these will have a lot of complications that I imagine I'm brushing over, you know, and there's so many ways that you've got to be careful that you can't actually cheat the system, and we don't want to encourage really weird gameplay, people grouping up too much or what have you, so I'm aware of all these things. So another one is communication. It would seem harsh to punish someone who's not communicating because maybe they're really shy, maybe they can't afford a mic, but at the same time, it's such an important aspect of the game. It can be such a game changer to have someone communicating, that to have that factor in, I think it just makes sense, you know. Obviously, it's not just a matter of, okay, we detected noise on the mic. It would have to be more clever than that, else you just play the radio in the background. You'd have to detect that they're using the right kind of words and language. Again, even that's fishy because, you know, you could just start randomly saying tracer behind, just say tracer behind every now and then. And I imagine there'd be a way to filter out the majority of the crazy, weird spam. And that being said, you could even go the other way and say detect abuse and negative toxicity. Could that factor in as well? I mean, it's a really touchy subject because you could argue that someone who's a bit of a douchebag may be a really good player and is kind of carrying the team. But personally speaking, if you're being really negative, that can only have a negative impact on the game. So just a couple more really. First of all, detecting ult value. Again, a fairly simple one. The timing of your ult, not just like you got 3 kills, great. When did you get those kills? Maybe you just got 1 kill, but maybe that 1 kill was really important. Maybe it detects how often you use your ult in a combination with another ult, or even just a matter of, you know, when you're wasting an ult, when you're, for example, when someone does a panic ult, maybe it still gets a couple of kills, but it's just pointless, you know. You've already lost the point, you're the last one alive, it's a wasted ult, and that would be something I would imagine that could factor in. And all these little things, although they just seem like, you know, you wouldn't want them to have huge impact, but everything together would create this picture of kind of what you're doing. I think that's the only way that this technology would get really good, is when there's hundreds of little factors all merged together, all being calculated behind the scenes to kind of paint this big picture. And then finally, kind of related to that, is the same thing but with your abilities. Some of these are blatantly being measured already. Things like hook accuracy, I imagine that must factor in already. But other things like flashbangs, sleep darts, how often do you hit a sleep dart? And how important are those sleep darts that you're hitting? Are they on valuable targets? As a Zarya, I play a lot of Zarya. Are you bubbling people and literally saving their lives from a Rhine charge, from a Diva bomb, whatever? Sure, it will say like how much you've shielded, how much damage you've shielded, but it's not just a matter of that figure, it's more about the circumstances of when you've shielded that damage, you know? Another one would be Lucio. I'm not great at Lucio, but obviously there's the right time to be doing the speed boost and there's the right time to be doing the heal boost. Surely that's something we can kind of calculate. You can figure out how healthy your team is, how healthy the other team is, where the threats are, and go, at this point they should probably be using healing, for example. I'm talking about this as if it's like easy, just, you know, code in some code, all the code, and easy peasy. But no, I have no idea how it would work, but I'm sure there are some clever people who could figure it out. Obviously the same with Mercy. You know, it'd have to be different for every single class. That's where it gets really difficult. It's not like there's one rule for all classes. It would have to be really fine-tuned and customized. I think the final thing would be like, I don't know if they do this already. I mean, you can obviously report people and that's fine, but surely you can detect blatant trolls, people blatantly throwing the game. It's not a matter of just being a tourbillon on offense. It's more to do with, they've got this class and they just sort of, they're sitting in spawn, they're running around, they're not even shooting, whatever it is. I think there'd be some simple things you could do and detect that troll. And one thing I don't quite understand is if someone does leave, surely they should just pause the game for a little bit while they try and fill that gap, just for like a minute or so. Maybe there's a reason for that, let me know in the comments below. Anyway guys, let me know what you think about some of these ideas. Are they ridiculous? Do they have some merit? Do you think some of these are already being used? So yeah, I'm excited for the future. I'm excited for them to continue to improve the matchmaking system in this game and in other games. And who knows, maybe some of these stats could be fed back to us, like, you know, your grouping it was really good as a Zarya, or you need to work on it as a soldier, or whatever. Could be really interesting. You know, the more data, the more stats, the better, really. I hope this was an interesting topic for you guys. I tried to choose topics to talk about that haven't been like completely done to death, and I've not seen anyone talk about this, so I hope you enjoyed. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
Oh shit, sorry.